And in terms of what I promised in the original abstract, I discovered once I started slightly ambitious, but excess. If this was any other topic, I would be apologising of excess, but today I won't. But it might be sort of a grindcore, black metal infused presentation. But the paper will present a map, a Deleuzean enterprise of an emergent set of connections pertaining to record and affect production and their blackened dynamic in black metal. And I'm working this through questions and considerations relating to the production process, the musical affective intent of black metal and the artist, and how the producer will interact with that. The numerous paradoxes and oppositions that are at play in black metal and its destructive creation, and notions of space-time, black metal production, and listener experience. And these were the key things that I put into the original proposal. But like I said, this kind of Deleuzean enterprise, I realized when I started working on it, I first thought that it would just be the bridge to the effect studies together with the work of Brian Masumi. But then I realized that I've gone all the way back to some work that I've done prior to 2001 and actually continues a very lifelong project on trying to utilize Deleuzean ideas and concept as a playground for generating space and new understandings, and something which I believe to be fundamental in black metal as a medium, as a genre, as a style, as a content, as a content, whatever you want to be calling it. One of the fundamental things that it allows, as well as destroys space, and something that I found from various practitioners who I spoke to. Quick quote from Scott Wilson: one of the most important things about this violent conjunction, he's referring to black metal and theoretical ideas, is the way in which black metal disrupts thoughts, leading to the creation of new concepts. And that is nearly a textbook Deleuzean definition of Deleuzean idea of concept, of philosophy producing concepts, art producing percepts and affects, and science producing lots of other things. But the black metal theory anti-school doesn't really, rarely seems to be referring to the Deleuzean concept. I'm going to go back a little bit and think about the background. Why am I doing this? And in order to get that, and in order to be giving some insight to why and how I've gone about this and what I'm looking to do, is that there are three different personal, problematic word, but connections that I have to black metal. One being as a producer, sound engineer, and post-acousmatic fixed media composer. More on that later on. We might be thinking, you might think of electroacoustic music, music concrete, acousmatic music. Something's happened to keeping fixed media. But in a nutshell, focus and an obsession with sound. I operate and have operated at the sound end of music and potentially the music end of sound if one has to make distinctions. Secondly, I will talk something to do with as a consumer of black metal or an addict. And thirdly, an educator in relation to that. I will start with the elements pertaining to the number one, which will be slightly denser aspects around that. And the title at the top, Empty Multiplicities and Singular Continua from 2001, was my practice-based PhD portfolio of studio compositions, fixed media compositions that I made back in the day in Birmingham, which was a culmination of quite a few years spent in a studio. And it's a key thing to note that I'm artificially separating live music from record making. I do not engage with live performances really much at all, not because I want to, where I live geographically, I can poor access to them. Secondly, I'm looking after my ears for professional purposes. So, but more on that later on. And a few key points, what I want to bring in, so these are just sort of precursors to drop at the back of the mind, and sort of experientially developed emergent theories, which at the time when I was writing, I did discover Deleuze and Guattari, and not as a solution for explaining something, but oh, someone has been doing something similar in a parallel domain. But what I genuinely believe and work from and operate in all those different capacities is the idea that the power of recorded media is not its ability to document. Exciting, like field recording, all that, but not the key for me, and the power and the disruptive power of fixed media is the ability to record, stop, playback, cut, edit, reverse, process, and that is at the fundamental cause of whether you can think of it as Barosian cuts-ups or whatever it is. Second, the corporeality of sound. Sound as a body, as a holistic, physical embodied reality, and thus fixed media sound in this context becomes the body, the corpus, in contrast to the living dead of the live black metal, which I will be looking at. So whilst for many people the live music making is the apex of their practice, I am focusing on something around a concept known as a post-acousmatic context and post-acousmatic sensibility that I introduced with a colleague, research colleague from Finland, Taimo Riikonen, who used to work at Sibelius Academy now in University of Turku, and we presented that in a conference in America about the scenario of understanding of our world and liveness in the world through the act of listening to recorded sound in some format. And we said that actually, whilst the recording is fixed, nothing else ever is fixed around that point. And the post to the acousmatic implies that we've had to have achieved a certain level of understanding of the acousmatic condition and the context, and or extensive purposeful training of problematic word reduced listening, and in general perception of micro ability to perceive micro perceptions and small variation, which people might do, say, as a mastering engineer or mixing engineer without thinking in these terms. And just to continue with these quickly, on a record, space intensity is in time, and the time is fixed, whilst in the live context the space is fixed. However much, whatever the band is doing, unless there's some very serious mechanics and projectors going on, I know that they will not suddenly transform into birds and fly off, unless I'm looking at some good holographic performance. On a record, I do not know what happens. I do know there's a limitation of the time, but there's no limitation to the possible spaces and transformations, and this links obviously to effect and affect in horror music and so forth. So I often thought about this simply as a cinematic versus theatrical experience. So it's cinematic, not theatrical, in a way approaching immersion and a drama, and the idea that there is an observer who's been aroused, effectively interior, and a passive exteriority in that kind of cinematic context or listening context when you are listening to records or when you are listening to the studios. You might be moving a bit, but we are looking at something different. And through this, and I'm not going to go in here in this format, but where this eventually will go, we're looking to go from this idea of post-acousmatic sensibility to the idea of looking at black metal as a medium, and what happens then when we look at, you can start to unpack it through media theory. What the record allows is that it enhances the sort of inhuman aspect in relation to acoustic separation, and we could think about the acousmatic medium and not the cut and the source bond removal as a deterritorialization, and in the Deleuzian sense, idea of a pure affect. Something relates to something that it isn't an actual thing. So the black metal concept, or often used concept, or even a Nietzschean concept of the Hyperborean could be an example of that. And I'm depositing here that the sound aspect perhaps gets us, that's an area that can be played more perhaps than the textual or the visual. Ability to do multiple perspectives, not in the sense of a cubist painter, but actually, as we know from a fugue, or from my perspective, more interestingly, a popular music record, I can hear details and the holistic elements at the same time, and all is connected. Like in a bodywork sense, the bones in your body create a frame around which the connected tissue is stressed up like a wetsuit. I used to have a parallel existence as a clinical body worker. So if I were to stretch my soft tissue here, everything shifts. That's how I perceive when working sound, when teaching students and people to work with sound. You cannot move elements out of place. And my keynote from yesterday was a great example of when people get looking at dots and forget that actually there's a material reality at play. Okay. Whilst Deleuzian cinema frees cinema from the idea of time as a connected order of sequence, What I'm saying is the recording frees us from the central idea of ordered space or ordered space-time. And I'm thinking these days more and more that sound is space-time. Sound is, it cannot exist outside of space and cannot exist outside of time. So I'm thinking, well, why am I wasting my time going two directions? So then final thing from here, I'm thinking, okay, well, what happens if I start thinking about black metal production as a sound-based composition and production practice? You listen to the perceivable spectrum of morphological qualities and behavior after Smalley. You collaborate with source materials. In this case, it's if you're a solo practitioner, if you're a you are doing it all, and you are interacting with that, or you are some of the people who are interviewed later on, and you are interacting with the material that comes to that. But the fundamental thing is that it shifts us from a pre-given quantitative area to a more emergent, organic, qualitative area. I'm going to try to sidestep the problems of phenomenology in relation to Deleuze here, and the idea of reduced listening, and pick up from Harris and say, well, actually. And that's what I try to do with the post-acousmatic thing, expanded listening. In order to first reduce so that you can actually expand. And it means that we can engage with the world again as opposed to hide away, but with a new sensitivity. If one isn't familiar with Smalley spectrum morphology, talking about sound behavior and sound shape, spectrum, content of sound at different frequencies, morphology, something moving in space and time. Whoa, I'm so behind. Consumer. Okay, high consumption. And there's a quote from Brian Masumi's keynote from 2015 that I've been busy transcribing from a recording. And yes, the effective hit of black metal is something that I cannot let go. I cannot find any other piece of music other than possibly psytrance that gives me that. Something else seems to now have a lack, even though there might be bigger, more produced, something has happened. 3 different monitoring spaces, important to note. Majority of the time binaural, I literally fortifying my own space. I work in the joys of academia's idea of an open plan office. That's another page, but the office as a non-office, and some kind of academic whatever. I'm literally cutting things out, but it also operates as a thinking aid. Any other music doesn't work. The closer it tends towards noise, the better, I think. Studio listening, then in an extreme high-end controlled monitoring environment, and it's given very interesting insights into that the higher the resolution, the better returns you're getting from the low-fi materials. And then car stereo, where you actually have this sort of distant perspective, non-immersive listening experience. And just a quick note, last time I went to a black metal gig, bit of a show-off, but it was one of the last gigs that Dark Throne ever played back in my hometown. At the time, I didn't know what I was meant to see. I thought, well, this is interesting. All my mates are going here. Okay. As an educator, I responded to a call originally by a colleague who's developed a content and a lecture series, as a module around the concept of dark sound. It became a symposium. There's a forthcoming book from published in Spanish. Anyway, a forthcoming book. And I've run a lecture since 2012 with changes about nihilism, misanthropy, and black metal. And view that I approach it through that perspective, different modalities of nihilism, teaching tool and a toolbox for the students to access and hopefully empower them through their own nihilisms. So, to be able to do what we're looking to do, a few quick notes about nihilism to take into account. Excellent work by a Finnish writer called Kalle Haatanen, who's done 4 categories of nihilism. But the key thing to pick up here, active, passive. Nietzsche gives us a link to Deleuze. We have the idea of paradox as a creative, destructive force dynamic. The idea of the active nihilist in the shortest possible sense. I know that there's no hope, and nevertheless I don't give up. I just keep on going. And this gives us a sense of also this sort of a conflicting tensegrity model, that we're not looking for synergies, we're looking to a scenario where you break in dualism's part by bringing extremes out. And obviously Punch is a great show of a misappropriation of Nietzschean ideas in black metal and elsewhere. And This is important. Nihilism is a state, could be a condition, a context, symptom, approach, critique. The elite, black metal for the elite, from the elite, some of these bands are also using it as a critique, was another place that they're actually proposing. So the NSBM scene is split into these kind of two different directions. So where there's an advocation, celebration, drive people towards depression or calling forth. By foreground, celebration and choice, and the kind of the individual aspect that's key in black metal. The reason we go there is because I'm making it, whilst Hunt Hendricks' text is exciting and fun to read, I believe that it's some fundamental misunderstandings of the complexity of nihilism. There isn't an opposition or dualism of, oh well, I'm suddenly going to become affirmative because I play this in major keys and there's a haptic void that we can never get to. They coexist. The Nietzschean active, it is in fact he's talking about active nihilism versus passive nihilism, or active nihilism towards destructive or creative directions. The affect, which Brian Masumi in 2015 from his 1994-97 paper, when he was sort of correcting himself, he said affect is neutral. Maybe we get to that later on. Annihilate, so forth and so forth. A few things quickly to note. Misanthropy comes quickly as a corollary from here, and normally through the other. And another theme, no pun intended there, that emerges often is that a lot of practitioners talk about other in different ways. Or I spoke to Jasmine Shadrock, had an interview with her, and she talks about black metal as the other, and the fundamental platform and medium for dealing with other. But following the nihilism, misanthropy, we talk about production of hate. Well, I'm talking about this intent, production of intent into affect production. And we're trying to get there. Why it also was important, and why I've been, instead of telling some kind of a linear story of this is what happened in Bergen this year, and then Mark Weakness went there and stabbed someone, I was trying to teach students about through nihilism was for the purpose that the topic is complex. Here's a quote about an excellent book about NSBM, well actually, if you think about the note ways and quite a lot of basic production techniques, hard to discern who is that and who isn't. You'll have to look at something else. I, however, make a proposition that if you listen to space, there's tend to be a different kind of dimension there. But massive amount of materials here, but the challenges that one has with of black metal, by the interest of time, well, the key is that there's the plurality, it's an assemblage, it's a multiplicity. We don't have a center. There's a lot of writing around it being noise. And in short, the potential, for example, black metal to morph itself to other genres and affect things, I believe is to do with this, it's how its blackened affect is quite adaptable. And hence, I'm proposing a model to go towards affect studies to look at this. Something that deals with extremities. People talk about raw formless potential, the idea of that the noise in fact comes out of multiple individualities. And then back to the beginning where we began from the idea that, well, actually we are having this consumption of this. Probably everyone knows, okay, famously Mark Weakness goes, well, I don't care, put it mic anywhere. Nevertheless, he went to pretty much the most prestigious studio he could find, Bergen. I used to live there, I have a studio in Bergen as well, and the Greek Holland studio is in a basement kind of scenario. I spoke to Mikko Asp a few weeks ago, refused to give any idea of anything about production because as if that would give something away. Important that we separate production from production. What does production produce? I'm interested in production machine, not the production mechanics. Whilst that's exciting, like tasting different beers, but that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in what is the machinic relationship of production to the artist's intent and the sound. So we could then start thinking about things being active, reactive, and then blackened production should be machinic. And we're dealing with something that of excess. Production value, a major point, high, low. We get a purposeful lo-fi, we get extreme hi-fi. I'm going to jump a little bit here. Most of it isn't anything rocking here is the most interesting thing is I interviewed Tom Dring, who've done Ignore Their Tongues, Dawn Raid, and he said that longevity was more likely on the lo-fi production than hi-fi. Thank you very much for listening. Well, yeah, there's a few more slides there. Any questions on anything to do with intent, affect, and record production?
The floor's yours. Any questions, everyone?
Hi, thank you. I'm wondering what your take would be on at what point issues related to, for instance, production can move something out of this more effective realm of an understanding of black metal and move it more into a, if not necessarily a different genre, music played in such a way as to utilize many of the stylistic tropes of black metal, but no longer be specifically black metal. And the obvious example for me recently is a band like De Vergana Freiheit, who they're a black metal band in the sense that the music that they play is black metal, except for the fact that their production is it's essentially kind of contemporary death metal production. Everything is as kind of perfect and crisp as it can possibly be. And reading reviews of their work and that kind of stuff, a decent amount of people are kind of loath to refer to them as black metal, in part because of this production aesthetic. And so I'm wondering, yeah, is there...
No, what I found exciting in that kind of area is I was plowing through examples of people's reviews where they fall into two camps. Those people talk about the content, whether it's the content of the production or the content of the music, and then those who describe black metal purely as affect, like this is the most soul-crushing, depressive album. You put it on and you can't stop, and you'll be feeling maddened for a week. Wow. And I think if the focus even of the high fidelity production is on that end, personally what I'm talking about, I feel it's on the trajectory where I feel what black metal's potential is. If it becomes, I'm sure it happens, and no disrespect, people just do it in studios, I can imagine also that it just gets utilized and capitalized on. At the moment, black metal, probably more than anything else, is just suddenly you find it in fashion, you find it in, I'm expecting to have a Netflix series soon where there will be people with corpse paint and the soundtrack is black metal. Just, I don't know, Smashing Pumpkins' last tour, suddenly, what's his name? Forgotten his name, lead singer, guitar player, he was wearing corpse paint and they had corpse paint. It's like, it's everywhere. And I would imagine that dynamic will continue. I don't know if that answers, but it does. But yeah, two camps. Interesting thing that when I had I did an email interview with Tom Green, and I was asking him and the other people who I was interviewing, Clandestine Plays, Jasmine Shadrock and Dawn Raid, to send me examples of what they think typifies for them black metal intent in sound and production. And it was interestingly, he said that when Dimmu Borgir's Puritanical Misanthropy came out, the production value, I don't think anyone had heard anything like that in that scene. And he said he was so taken by it, but now, listening back to it just for this, he said it feels really plastic. It seems, when you're reaching for the best that you can do at any given time, it tends to age quicker than when that hasn't been done. And when I spoke to Clandestine Blaze, so Mikko Asplund, Deathspell, Omega, Northern Heritage, and he was making a proposition that he thought that all the studios that has become the metal studios in the Nordic countries, the early albums that they did, they worked because they had no idea what they were doing. In Greek Hallen, the engineer, he wasn't a metal engineer, he was just an amazing engineer with great kit. And then some of the other places, Abyss and somewhere else, they didn't know what they were doing, and it worked. And then they had made a career out of it. So.
I'll play devil's advocate and that sentiment. The reason that black metal has had such a huge impact worldwide is due to Dimmu Borgir and their higher fidelity aesthetic. So they're obviously on the Hellboy soundtrack, was it? And I think there's the idea that music is more timeless because it has got more atmosphere due to the production value, I think is an interesting one, but I don't think that the albums that are typically lo-fi, like the Dark Throne, Transylvanian, I don't think that's timeless. I think albums where there's more sonic impact, where the listener can hear the virtuosity of the performance, arguably, I'm playing devil's advocate here, is a lot more timeless. And I think those are going to just be looked at as poor, cheap demos that had a great atmosphere. If you enjoy the atmosphere, that's great. But I think a lot of listeners want to hear clearly the value and the virtuosity in the performance.
Absolutely. I mean, it was interesting that Tom came up with that. We were mainly talking that the production is more timeless in his mind, that there's more longevity to it. I think it's to do with, okay, say, other example, I compared Stormblast and Stormblast UMV 2005, so what is it, 96 and 2005, as an example, see, what do we get out of the idea of production value when, you know, the artist wants to redo it, so there's clearly something's happened.
Sure.
But there it's a major reworking. But there, the 2005 version, you can actually hear the multi-band compression has literally left this like geological spectrum stratus across the whole mix.
Yeah.
Someone who likes the album and doesn't do studio work is not going to hear that. They're just going to go, well, this sounds good. And I guess part of that longevity from the perspective, like you were saying, I would imagine it's just to do with quantity as well.
Yeah.
There is more, didn't want to get out there.
Sure.
And that will help as opposed to, and I can imagine it's been a literally, pun intended, gateway.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sing the chorus now, to some of the other areas.
It's fascinating. I think it's really interesting.
Very quick. Yeah, can you just talk very briefly a bit more about intent? Because I tend to think that intent, in terms of like the creative purpose of a separate individual, is often wildly overstated in how kind of these important things. Very quick.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And then my dream of where to take this would be to look at in quite a careful detail one of the quite unique aspects of black metal music, which is the one person. Typically, it is the one-man band, where there is no separation between the songwriter, the performer, the producer, the mixing engineer, in some cases even mastering engineer, and there you literally get in this sort of what I call Ouroborean feedback loop between all those different workflows go somewhere. That's why when I send out the interview query out to people, I was asking the artists, how do they communicate their intent to their producer, if they do, and what do they want to achieve in terms of an affect, as opposed to, oh, we're going to have this riff and that riff. And similarly ask the producers how they like to be communicated and what they get told. I didn't get much out of that. What I think does, where intent does matter, is you're looking at something like, I looked at Graveland, the Polish band who go from Viking to pagan to, hey, we're ultra right-wing and everything in between. There's an interesting jump. The early albums are great, like a textbook example if you want to make crushing music but with a really, really weak production sound. And then I think it's the third or fourth album, One After 1,000 Swords, or maybe it's 1,000 Swords, which is the album that they suddenly get banned in Germany and they get listed in all this different thing. The production value and everything changes, and there's a different, you can hear the intent manifest differently at sonic level as opposed to lyrics. Because obviously the natural thing is to go to lyrics.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.